Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I'm advertised as speaking on Bhakti Siddhanta, which I've been doing in the last few days. It's a very heavy topic. I've been speaking quite strongly. Today I'm going to change the tenor. I'll speak today about Bhakti Siddhanta in a different way, because we shouldn't speak anything but Bhakti Siddhanta. But all the topics that we should speak on are Bhakti Siddhanta. So today, in a different way, we're fortunate to be here today in the presence of His Holiness Janananda Goswami. Now, of course, when any of us first came to Krishna consciousness, we didn't know anything about Bhakti Siddhanta, or even about Bhakti Vedanta, Srila Prabhupada. And apart from those coming from India, most of us didn't really know much about Krishna either. And even those who were coming from India, what they knew about Krishna was mostly a mishmash of very strange ideas about Krishna. So, I first came to Krishna consciousness by the mercy of the devotees. I got one of Srila Prabhupada's books. I came to the temple, Bhakti Vedanta Mana. And from the very beginning, one of the devotees who I had interaction with was Janananda Das Brahmachari at the time. So I'm going to speak about His Holiness. Of course, you may say, well, there's a lot of difference between Bhakti Siddhanta and Janananda Goswami. And clearly, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur is a highly empowered Acharya, a very special devotee from the spiritual world. And we wouldn't place all the devotees who are following in his footsteps and following in the footsteps of Srila Prabhupada in the same category, or maybe wouldn't place hardly any of them. We should know also, while praising devotees, we should also know that some are very special empowered acharyas, but in another sense there is no difference between Bhakti Siddhanta, Saraswati Thakur, and his followers who are faithfully following him, inasmuch as they speak the same message, they act in bhakti according to Siddhanta, and therefore they're in essence non-different. So in one sense they are one by the mercy of Janananda Prabhu and others, not exclusively him. At that time, Janananda Prabhu, I was able to be admitted into this Krishna consciousness movement before I had any idea about Bhakti Siddhanta. Many devotees, of course, helped me along the way, but Janananda Prabhu, I'll refer to him like that because my memories of him are mostly like that. So, according to the time frame I'm speaking about him, he was known as Janananda Prabhu. So, from the beginning he was special to me, and he has remained so. When I got an email in which I was invited to attend this meeting of devotees here, what's it called, a camp or seminar? Retreat. Okay, that's the word here, retreat. We're supposed to attack Maya, but not retreat. But sometimes we come together to get a little energy so we can go out and attack. But we're not meant for retreat. But it's used in a different sense. It's used in the sense of getting together to become more inspired and enlightened in Krishna consciousness. Yeah, so when I saw that, I saw they'll be in Scotland, and I saw and Janananda Goswami's coming, then yeah, I'm coming too. I'm going. So that was the deciding factor for me, because I used to get his associate. I mean, we used to be, we used to see each other a lot. We don't see each other that much nowadays. One of my very first memories of life in devotional service, I can still see in my mind's eye the picture of him dancing in Mangalati. I had come to Bhaktivedanta Mana. It was Easter weekend 1975. It must be around Easter now, isn't it? No, wait a minute. It's gone. It's gone past. I'm a bit out of touch with the Western world. So that was over 36 years ago. So, I came, and by circumstance, means by Krishna's plan, I was obliged to stay overnight. I didn't plan to, but it just happened like that. I couldn't get out. So, okay, you're disturbing, isn't much, but if a cell phone goes off, we're going to fine you £25. So please turn your cell phones off. Mobile phone, what do they call in this country? Mobiles, cell phone, whatever they're called. Everyone has one. You don't have one. You are among the intelligent people. I don't have one. I consider myself intelligent, but I don't have a cell phone. People ask me, how do you get peace? I tell them, first thing, get rid of your cell phone. So, Putting one there. Might be a bomb. They're afraid of them, right? Blow up. I've been throwing out bombs in my lectures anyway. Bomb me back. Okay, everyone please turn off your dearly beloved cell phone and we'll get on with the class. Yeah, I was talking about, so I got stuck overnight at the manor. I wasn't, it didn't bother me. I was quite happy to do so. I'd already, just in that first evening, by speaking to devotees, thought that, I got to join here. But the Mangalati really convinced me, because it was freezing cold. It was snowing outside. That's why I couldn't leave. Even though it must have been, it was late spring, I guess. Snowing outside, and it's freezing cold. There was no heating in the building, because devotees in those days didn't have much money. And after having a cold shower, and it's very cold, then went to Mangalati and saw all the devotees dancing, and I thought, these people are really serious. They're really into it. They get up every morning and take a cold shower and dance for God. They're really serious, and I was convinced I got to join them. So, in my mind, I still remember the picture of Janananda Prabhu dancing with one hand up and the beautiful tune that was sung. So that's etched into my memory. Yesterday in the kirtan, the 7 o'clock kirtan, Janananda Maharaj was leading, and I was just, because I hadn't been with him for a long time. I mean, in different places, but like this small group of devotees. Maybe this is large for Karuna Bhavan, but I live in India, where if I'm with a group of 50 devotees, that's pretty small. It's 1,300 million population, and There's a lot of people. I mean, we don't get to see them all at once, but we generally have larger groups of devotees than in this part of the world. So, I was remembering there's so many times I'd been in kirtan with him, and just the same blissful style, blissful dancing. He always had love for kirtan and for japa also. He's giving seminars here on the holy name. Now, when I joined, he was already a senior man in the movement. I didn't find out till years later, but he actually had a university degree, which was uncommon among devotees at that time, because most were either university dropouts or, like myself, never dropped into university. He was a senior devotee. Been about 4 years. 4 years in the movement, which in those days was a long time, because the movement started in 1969 in Britain, I believe, and I joined in 1975. So the oldest devotees in England were 6 years in the movement, and 4 years was senior man. And he was senior also in as much as that he would take up administrative roles. Because he was sober and intelligent. So he was in the treasury when I joined, but he was fed up with it, just counting money and dealing with accounts. And the main job in the treasury was to tell people no, because there was no money. And it was difficult for a brahmachari with all the householders living there. So what happened shortly after I joined, they stuck me in there, which was, I never chose that, but anyway. So he was in the treasury and he showed me what to do, and was happy to get out of that. But I had to consult him from time to time. And anyway, he was, as were so many devotees at that time, he was very kind to me, helped me to understand, because joining, I'd hardly heard of the Krishna consciousness movement. All of a sudden there's so many things you have to learn and you're supposed to know and do. And in those days there was no bhakti program as such. It's just like whenever you did something wrong, which was pretty much all the time, because you don't know what to do, then someone would let you know in no unclear terms. So I guess that's why I do that. Maybe I was trained like that myself. So he's helpful to me, gave his time to me, which I very much appreciated. And many devotees must have this experience with him, that instantly you feel like you have a friend. So it's not like you have to spend days and months and years to get to know him to be a friend, but immediately you feel as if you have a friend, because he was always like very unassuming and not considering himself very important, always attached to the basics of Krishna consciousness, like I said, kirtan, japa. He always loved prasadam. He was always a great relisher of prasadam. Always liked to get out on book distribution. Although he had various positions within the movement, he was never attracted to having a big position. I mean, if he'd have played his cards right, so to speak, he could have probably gone up in the institutional, made a good career or whatever. But he was never attracted. He was never attracted to anything superficial. He would take positions because he would do the needful. And many times, in various places, he saw that things needed to be done, and especially in administration, as you might have noticed, our movement is, well, maybe it's better nowadays, but in those days especially, we were probably the most organized religion around. So people who came to us and said, well, I don't like organized religion, we'd tell them, well, you'll get on fine with us. We ran on the principle of Krishna's mercy and not that much actual organization. So he would take administrative roles and do the needful. He was often, although he always loved to be out preaching, he would often just do the needful, and even in administration, he would be like things that needed to be done, legal matters, financial matters. Especially he was always concerned that the books get printed in various places. He served in many places, in Kenya, in Africa, and then in Malaysia, and various far-flung places. He's generally very joyful and jolly, but never trivial, never speaking about nonsense subject matters. Sometimes, those of you who know him will know he's sometimes very grave, and speaking in a very grave manner about the importance of Krishna consciousness. Never interested in sense gratification. He loves to relish prasadam, but always in the consciousness that this is prasadam. Although he loved to relish prasadam, but not that he'd be eating foods cooked by non-devotees, specifically prasadam. He always relished that, and he often speak on the glories of prasadam as he was relishing it. He's also, I don't know if he cooks much these days, but he also used to cook a lot. I used to cook also, but somehow or other I don't remember actually ever cooking with him. Although in Malaysia we spent a lot of time together, and sometimes he'd cook, sometimes I'd cook, and somehow we didn't get in the kitchen much together. Yeah, we spent a lot of time together in Malaysia, especially here in England. And then I left here in Britain. Then I joined in 1975, and I left. When I first went to India, he was on that trip also. I believe it was in 1976. I think he was on that trip also to Mayapur and Vrindavan. I remember one thing from that trip in 1976 in Mayapur, that like many other devotees coming from the West, he got stomach problems. It was very common, especially at that time still, that devotees coming from the West to India would get stomach problems. So he had diarrhea, something like that. So and I was very sick. I had something else altogether. Those days, Mayapur, there was one building, and there was a wall. There was one main building, and there was the prasadam hall, and there was the wall which had little cabins on them, and we were staying in one of those cabins. So he didn't use a mosquito net, so he was constantly covered with, looked like someone had whipped him or something, with so many dots all over his face. One afternoon he came back to our huts. We were staying in these huts with his eyes shining, and said, "I'm cured of my diarrhea." He said, I went to the pujaris and asked for some Mahaprasad. I was surprised. There's so many devotees. He said, no one. There was plenty of Mahaprasad. No one was coming for it. So I had plenty of puris and rich sabji with lots of ghee. Now I'm completely cured. So that was his cure for diarrhea. That was what cured him. Then in 1977, I left England for India with the idea of staying, which I more or less did. And then I didn't see him for some time. And then in the early 1980s, both he and I were serving under Prabhavishnu Swami, who had been our leader in England. So his zone at that time, he wasn't a GBC member, but he had an area which comprised Nepal, Bangladesh, Burma as it was then called, Thailand and Malaysia, and not Singapore. So I spent, we were together, myself and him, quite a lot in Malaysia, in our center in Kuala Lumpur, which is the main city there. So, although he was senior to me, by that time we'd both been in the movement similar number of years. And, well, from the very beginning he was very friendly to me. He didn't come over like I'm a big senior or something like that. But we were serving on a similar level, that the movement had been through a lot of difficulties there, and we were both trying to help it get together again, and we were both somewhat senior at that time. So, yeah, we spent, I would be in Malaysia for some months at a time, and I would go out traveling more. He would be in the center, mostly in the center. I would go out traveling on book distribution, and he'd be in the center, and he was getting books printed and just trying to get all the administration together. And that time we spent a lot of time, and we really we were already very close, but we became very close at that time. I don't remember any time actually when we had any real disagreement or our outlook on Krishna consciousness. Hare Krishna, something is not working there. Our outlook on Krishna consciousness from the beginning was very similar, and even personally, we never. I don't remember having anything like bad feeling. It's probably because he's so tolerant of everything and everyone. Now at that time, for some reason or other, the congregational devotees were really, some of them, they were really giving him a hard time. Quite unfairly, actually. And they were complaining. Hare Krishna. Needs new batteries? Okay. Alright. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jai Shri, Jai Shri, Tulsinath. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Hare Rama, Rama Rama. Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Yeah, some of the congregational devotees were complaining about myself and himself, but more about him, because they thought he was too strong or too heavy or something. There was some complaint about him because in a lecture he used the word karmis, which is, it's a word Prabhupada used all the time, but just for speaking in what we would consider a normal way, they felt it was too strong and too, so we neither of us could relate to it, and especially he was under a lot of, for some or other they picked on him quite unfairly, and it got to him a bit, because he was already, he was having some difficulty, you could say, because he couldn't, he'd been in England at that time, he was serving under Bhagavan, the erstwhile Bhavan Goswami. And in retrospect, I can see this was the situation. He couldn't relate to that because he had joined the Krishna consciousness movement. He was very simple, down to earth, and Bhagavan Goswami's style was lots of money, lots of prestige, meet big people, and the whole movement was like, get your big position, have a big fancy car, a fancy watch, and Janananda, he couldn't relate to that at all. So he went off and started preaching in Newcastle. He just got away from all that. And just started preaching in a very simple way. He didn't have any money. He would come back every so often to Croom Court, which was the main centre, somewhere in Worcestershire, I believe it was, South Midlands. He'd come by hitchhiking because he didn't have any money for the bus. He told me once that, does hitchhiking still go on? Still it does, yeah. Because I thought people might be afraid to pick anyone up. But he told me once that a woman picked him up and she said, I wouldn't pick up anyone else, but I'm picking up you because I know you're a good person. Because he'd go in devotee clothes all the time. And others, so many things he told me when we were in Malaysia. I'm just trying to remember some of them. Now maybe this is in Mayapur. He told me that he'd gone to Navadvip and he had these flip-flop shoes, Hawaii, what do you call them? He's wearing those, Hawaii chapels. And he had a torn dhoti. And there's just the opposite of the Bhagavan era style, where they had like fancy kurtas, embroidered kurtas. And someone called out, sadhu, sadhu. They appreciated that. It's a funny thing. If you dress very nicely, then some people will appreciate that and some people will not appreciate it. And if you dress very roughly, some people will not appreciate it and some people will appreciate it. Because some people think that, yes, if it's all very smart and high class, we can relate to that. And other people think that, well, no, religious people, they shouldn't be like that. They should be. So you can't win. Maybe you could go halfway or something, I don't know. So, so there was, and he often told me at that time, he seemed disturbed, that he often told me that he had so much envy in his heart, and I couldn't understand it because I couldn't see even a trace of envy. But in retrospect, what I see is that he just couldn't relate to so many things, that the movement had changed, especially in England where he'd come from, and everyone was saying, you're off, you're wrong, you're out of date, and all this kind of thing, because he just liked to keep it simple, and be simple Krishna consciousness. And there's all this sophisticated management systems and all these very sophisticated kind of stuff, and he couldn't relate to it, and I guess he felt there was something wrong there, and he interpreted that as envy, but I don't see it as envy. There was something wrong there, as became apparent. So all of those who are into that, high society, sophisticated kind of stuff, well, they're not around now, and he's still going on with his simple Krishna consciousness. So, but he couldn't. He tell me, well, I'm feeling envious. I couldn't understand what he was saying because it didn't make any sense to me. But that's how he saw it, because he could never. He's never critical of anyone. It's like even he'd see things that aren't correct, but he never had a critical attitude toward anyone. And even if there were things which he could see which were wrong or are wrong, put it in the present tense also, he'd always see the good side of things, what devotees are doing, what they're doing properly. So, so he went. It was a difficult. Much of that time in Malaysia was a difficult time for him. Seemed like that, but he never diminished his service. It's not like he got. He was never any less enthusiastic for service, and especially we had very blissful kirtans there. There were just a few. Now the movement's developed a lot, so much in Malaysia. That time we just had a few brahmacharis. There were Singheshwar, Sri Gauranga, Siddhi Sadhana, Deva Deva, Loka Swami. There were just a few brahmacharis, and we do service in the day, and then often in the evening. Sometimes we go out for book distribution in the evenings. Good book distribution in the evenings, going to the open air restaurants, because it's an equatorial country. It's hot all the year round. So in the evenings people go out to open air restaurants. So it's very good for book distribution. But often if we're in the temple and we'd all come together for evening arati, and often we'd just go on and on with the kirtan. And after the arati we'd go out the front of the temple onto the lawn, and we go on having kirtan, and often get quite wild and exuberant, and we were all sweating like anything. It was so hot, and then I think it was me. I'm not sure. Maybe it was Singheshwar got the idea to bring out the hose and hose us all down while we're having in the middle of kirtan. So we had the Balaram mridangas, these plastic mridangas. So we'd go on with kirtan and be completely soaking wet, and lots of laughing and falling on the ground and all kinds of like this. So I want to say it was a difficult time, but it wasn't that difficult. I mean, we were all happy in Srila Prabhupada's service. Like I say, anyway, it was a difficult time in Malaysia, but the movement had gone through a very difficult period, but he concentrated on the basics, getting books published and distributed, getting the administration in order. He always worked hard. Even though others distrusted him, he went on working without complaining. And it was typical of him that he'd often service. He'd work hard for days and days, and then he'd just collapse, exhausted. He'd be anyway, the climate is very exhausting, hot and humid. But if he had some important work to do, he'd sometimes work. Actually, quite often he'd work all night or very late at night, and he'd be up early in the morning. He'd go on like that, and until he collapsed. And then again he'd get up and he'd be back to work like that. So, complete dedication. One time he told me, there was one recording of Srila Prabhupada singing Haraye Nama Krishna, Yadavaya Nama, in which Prabhupada's voice, it cracks in ecstasy. So we'd play that. again and again. And he told me that he used to listen to this recording over and over and over again when he was doing a service in Kenya. He was copy-proofing a book which was in Swahili. That means in those days you'd type it up, and then the typesetter would set the type, and you have to check the copy proof from the original, the manuscript, the what's supposed to be printed against the original, because usually in typesetting so many mistakes are made. So he was doing this because there was no one else to do it, and he would usually do the kind of things which no one else would do. He was doing that in Swahili. He had no idea of Swahili. So he'd just have to check every letter. So you can imagine what a difficult and grueling and service that was, just to sit hour after hour, day after day, checking, proofreading in a language that you have no knowledge of. So he told me that while doing that, he would just listen over and over and over again to this Hare Nama Krishna recording by Srila Prabhupada. Where are we? Yeah, then later he stayed in Malaysia for many years. I didn't. I was there on and off for a total of about, I don't know, a year, 18 months, something like that. And then in 1989, I relocated my area of service after 10 years in that zone with Hare Krishna, Prabhu Vishnu Swami. I relocated to India. So then, after that, we didn't see each other nearly as much as we used to. From time to time, even before, I mean, mostly in Malaysia, England. We were together sometime for a brief period in Bangladesh, Singapore, which is almost Malaysia. Different place. India, of course, we used to see each other from time to time. So I just have a few notes here. It's not going very chronologically or systematically. He's written 2 books. One is Srila Prabhupada in Malaysia. That's a project that I actually started that, but I didn't get I thought it'd be a good idea, as Prabhupada visited there, to make a book about that, but I didn't get very far with it. But he followed it through and made that book. And another one is his book, Animals in Krishna Consciousness. Have you seen that book? That really is classic Janananda, and he classifies himself with all the animals. So that's really his mood, like reaching down to everyone without discrimination, even the animals. And fun, but at the same time seriously dedicated to Krishna. Yeah. By his very nature, he'll probably never be what you might call a very big devotee in Amma, because he's a sannyasi, Prabhupada disciple, senior devotee, guru, but some devotees are seen as very big and influential and powerful within the movement. So he'll probably never be like that, because he doesn't aspire to such roles, and he prefers to be in the background and with the what you might say the common devotees. He likes to keep everything very simple in his life and likes to be with simple people. He's not that he has anything against any big leaders. He appreciates them, but as I see it, he sees his role as one who supports others and helps others who are taking the lead like that. So he is much appreciated by various GBC members and other leaders in areas that he works. He doesn't get involved in controversies, but on the other hand, he doesn't get involved in deviations. I mean, there's so many veering off on various tangents that have gone on, but he's never been involved in any of them because he's always committed to just the basics. Kirtan, prasadam, temple program, book distribution, japa, be with the devotees, tries to help devotees come up in Krishna consciousness. He's very patient, very helpful with devotees having problems. Even at least one of my disciples, I know he's like constantly, he's living the Shastra in the sense that verse about Kali Yuga, the main symptom is the mind is always disturbed. So in that sense, he's always living the Shastra. So that devotee is, I just used to write me so many letters. I just say, I just write back and say, chant Hare Krishna and forget your mind. I wouldn't get into it, just chant Hare Krishna. I wouldn't. He'd write long letters and I just write like one line in reply, just chant Hare Krishna and be happy. But Janananda Maharaj keeps in contact with him, keeps on helping him. He's more compassionate than me in that sense. He doesn't get involved in controversies, doesn't get involved in deviations, has deep faith in Srila Prabhupada, simple faith you could say, in the sense that he simply accepts that Srila Prabhupada is a pure devotee and we have to follow him without being overly intelligent. Just stick to the basics that Prabhupada gave us. So, because of that, he is loved by all devotees. Once a devotee said to Prabhupada that, Srila Prabhupada, everyone loves you. And Prabhupada said, yes, because I love everyone. And that's a good description of Janananda Maharaj also. That you'd have to be really quite wicked not to like him. So he's dear to devotees in various places. It's like that. He doesn't force himself on anyone, but by his humble and concerned dealings, he wins the trust of people rather than trying to force them to, or bludgeon them into following him. So in this way, he's become dear to devotees in several places, in Malaysia, in New Zealand, in India, in Czechoslovakia, and parts of the United Kingdom. So he's a good role model to follow. We're supposed to see devotees and follow their example. I've not been able to do so. Due to my own puffed up nature. I'm not humble, as you might have noticed. But at least I can appreciate. I can appreciate him. And I'm happy to have the opportunity to speak about him. I'm very happy that he's accepting disciples and expanding the movement of Srila Prabhupada. I'd be very happy to recommend any of my disciples to him for guidance, association. I'm very happy that he's being properly honored now as a sannyasi and as a guru, even though he doesn't want honor, but he should be properly honored. And I thought to speak about him, especially his disciples will appreciate that, I hope. And others also may appreciate this great devotee who's just his whole life has been full-time service to Krishna and Srila Prabhupada's movement. Maybe I didn't appreciate enough myself previously, but as they say, separation makes the heart grow fonder, so I don't see him so much these days, but like I say yesterday in the kirtan as he was dancing blissfully, it was like I was transported back in time. This used to be every day we'd be together in kirtan, and we did lots of kirtan together. I used to do a lot more kirtan, but at one point I lost my voice and I never really got it back again. So I have a tendency to lose my voice. So nowadays I'm doing more writing kirtan. That's also kirtan. But I was just remembering that, and then some feelings of appreciation arose, by which I thought that today I'd speak on Bhakti Siddhanta by speaking about Janananda, which are the same. Bhakti Siddhanta means the conclusion of devotional service, and devotional service will certainly make everyone happy. So the two names describe the same thing in different ways. All right, well, finished quicker than I thought I would. Does anyone have any question or comment? The last few days I've been asking if anyone has any question or comment or protest, but I don't think there'll be any protest today. I didn't say anything provocative today, unless you're a demon, but you're not demons. Only demons won't like devotees being glorified. Anything? Anyone like to say? Yes.
We were talking between friends. The point raised is that the congregational chanting, japa chanting, and congregational sankirtana, when compared, but I get the understanding that the sankirtana.
This is not a question. Does anyone have any excuse me just a minute. Does anyone have any questions about what I've been talking about just now?
Sorry.
First of all, and then we can get, if we have time, we'll get into other questions. Yes, please.
Actually, I had yesterday's question, not today.
Oh, I see. All right. Okay, so it seems we're open to. Okay, so you're asking about Sankirtan, congregational chanting.
Congregational Sankirtan and congregational japa.
Japa is generally not considered a congregational activity. We might sit together and chant, but it's Sankirtan. Srila Prabhupada has translated as congregational chanting, yes. And japa he defines as when you chant to hear for yourself.
But we do congregational japa.
You may sit in the same place and chant also.
The point I got into my mind, I don't know. If we do japa, there is a chance of having a rupa dhyana.
Which dhyana?
Rupa dhyana. We get the image into our mind.
Rupa dhyana?
Yes, rupa.
Rupa dhyana.
Yes.
Yeah, we may see the form of the Lord in our mind.
Yes, and but in the process to...
Well, before that stage comes of the Lord revealing Himself in our heart, we have to become purified of material attachments. Generally the Lord doesn't reveal Himself unless we're purified of material attachments.
Yes, but the higher state probably happens
Yeah.
But I'm talking about myself. If I do japa, I tend to have the image of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu or Krishna at different times in different ways. But that's what I was thinking, that probably focusing on the mind rather than in the visual mind rather than oral mind, which is probably oral, that is hearing, that should be. And is that it is considered that it is lower than the Sankirtan, the congregation?
Srila Prabhupada recommended in chanting japa to hear the sound, concentrate on hearing the sound.
Why it is one is superior than the other?
In Kali Yuga especially, the chanting is considered superior, more important process. Because it's easy, and because the sense of hearing is it's more direct than the sense of hearing. As Srila Prabhupada often gave the example, if you're asleep, then you can't see, but you can hear. You can still you can be wakened up by hearing. So that hearing that penetrates to that's a transcendental sound that vidyate vidya grantis chidyante sarva sangshayaha. The transcendental sound pierces through the coverings of material attachment and reaches our heart. So seeing we can misunderstand, but hearing the name of Krishna and hearing topics of Krishna, especially we have to hear from pure devotees, that's it's very easily assimilated, and with that goes understanding. By hearing, proper kirtan, proper chanting means that we have to hear the philosophy of Krishna consciousness spoken also. So hearing is most important. Hearing comes first. Hearing, chanting. Then if we see, we'll understand. Because if we see the form of the Lord, we won't understand who He is unless we hear properly. So hearing is essential. Seeing is also there, but hearing is essential.
Maharaj, in India, people write in the books name of Krishna, and they say, so is it inferior to the Indian?
What do you mean? Writing Ram, 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 Ram? Well, it's not the recommended process. You can do that, it's good, but it's better to chant the names, which is recommended in Shastra.
So is it lower type of writing?
Well, lower... There's no material gradation. If we're writing Ram, 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 that's the name of Rama, who is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But the recommended process for this age is to chant the names. Yeah, they have banks with names, but it's not recommended in any Shastra particularly. It's recommended to chant the names. Chant and hear. So like I say, it's not bad, but it's not the recommended process. So yeah, better is to chant the names rather than write them. Yeah.
Actually, this is regard to yesterday. Actually, Srinivas gave basically on science.
The mundane scientific method. I didn't elaborate on the transcendental method, which is hearing from and serving devotees, but I was just pointing out how the mundane scientific method is inadequate for approaching transcendence and is contrary to the transcendental process. Yeah, so?
In that, actually, one thing is, science, if you see, there are some positives and there are some negatives. Everything has its positive and negative.
Everything has its positive and negative. Well, Krishna is only positive. There's nothing negative about Krishna. And material world's all negative. There's nothing actually positive. I mean, the only good thing about the material world is that Srila Prabhupada came here and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came here. Otherwise, there's nothing good about it. In the material sense, you may say something is positive or something is negative, but it all ends up the same. Birth, death, old age and disease. So, what's positive and negative? What's negative? Dvaite bhadra bhadra gyan shab mano dham e bhalo e manda shab mano dharma. There's Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said that on the platform of it's our mental concoction to think that something is good or bad in this world. Science is good. Yeah, I gave that example yesterday. We invented putting lead in the petrol. It made all pollution. Invented CFCs as refrigerants and for aerosols and spoiled the ozone layer. And what was the other thing that inventor invented? CFC. DDT. So these three great contributions. Positive, negative, well, it's all ends up in birth, death, old age and disease. So, is it really positive? What's positive? The only ultimate good comes from surrendering to Krishna. Without that, everything else is useless. What is the use? If we say we made scientific progress, so now we can be in this building and it's warm without having a fire, without having to go to the trouble of building a fire. Of course, someone has to build a power station, and you have to pay. Someone has to work. You have to work to pay the bills, but it's convenient, and it gives an heat without local pollution, the pollution somewhere else. Okay, that's good. But then still you have to suffer birth, death, old age and disease. So without Krishna consciousness, what is the use? It's like in Auschwitz, the most famous of the Nazi death camps. Those who are being marched to the gas chambers. There was a live orchestra playing for them as they were being marched to their deaths. So that's nice, huh? Had an orchestra playing. Listen to some nice music. But they're going to be slaughtered. So what's the benefit? We're all heading toward death and rebirth and then struggle and then again death and then again rebirth. So what's the value of this? So I mean, all right, it's nice to have a warm room in this miserable weather here. Although, like I say, the downside is experienced in other ways. We don't immediately see it. The pollution is elsewhere, and then it's not just from the power station, but to build a power station, you have to have mines and factories and all kinds of things. Hare Krishna. So, you're not getting the true benefit of science here. Okay, I'll just hold it. Yeah. So, we should see that in perspective. I mean, we could give so many examples that someone's being whipped, beaten, lashed with a whip, and he's got a little itch here, and he scratches it and feels some relief. But in the meantime, he's being lashed with a whip. So what the little relief you get from scratching compared to the lacerations on your back is it's the proportion of the relief you get compared to the pain you get from something else makes the benefit of the relief insignificant. So in the same way, anything that might seem good in this world, we can say there are some good things. But compared to the bad things of this world, it's all insignificant. So you were going to say science has some positive and negative. You are saying that, you are stating a premise on which you're going to make a question, but I don't accept the premise, so I don't know if you could still ask the question. Is there any need to ask the question now?
What I was, my question was...
We're not against the use, just like we're using this microphone.
Yes.
So it has its usage,
Yes.
if you use it for Krishna consciousness. Otherwise, if you use it for rock and roll music, no benefit. But if you use it for speaking about Krishna, benefit. But we don't need this for Krishna consciousness. We don't need any of the technological inventions. We all came here by motor cars and this and that, but if those didn't exist, well, we'd live in localized communities, and Krishna consciousness would spread as it did previously by walking. Shankara, of course, he wasn't spreading Krishna consciousness, but he spread his doctrine all over India by walking. Ramanuja, by walking. Madhva, by walking. He walked twice from Udupi in the south up to Badrinath. Usually once is, if you do it once, that's usually the end of, if you say you go to Badrinath, that's usually, that's the end of your life usually. People do it in old age and then they don't come back, they don't survive it. He went out, so he spread it all over. So, these things are not required. There was one sadhu from Bengal. Who was that? He walked over the Himalayas, went to Russia. Who was that? I can't remember now. It doesn't matter because he wasn't a devotee anyway. Yeah, then? Alright, so we'll finish there. Alright, Hare Krishna. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada ki Jai. Shri Janananda Goswami